The ancient dragon opened one eye when the human boy said no, and every alien in the chamber stepped backward before anyone remembered they were supposed to be brave. I was there, standing behind the third observation rail with a medical badge on my chest and the confidence of someone who believed the universe was finally done surprising him. The chamber belonged to the Xenological Recovery Wing of Station Halberd 9, a place built for things too rare to discard and too dangerous to trust. Its walls were 30 feet high, its floor was reinforced with layered alloy, and its central containment cradle was large enough to hold a cargo shuttle. Today, it held Valethar. Some called him a dragon because the human language loved making old nightmares sound simple. We called him a Class 12 ancient aerothermal predator, which was longer, colder, and still failed to explain what it felt like to stand near him. Even dying, he made the room feel smaller. His wings were folded against his sides like collapsed storm clouds. His scales had once been black with gold edges, or so the archive images claimed, but now they looked dull beneath the white medical lights. Every few seconds, his enormous chest rose, paused, and fell again. Each breath moved enough air to stir the coats of the doctors watching from behind the safety glass. Commander Sareth Kor stood near the front, hands clasped behind his back, silver uniform perfect, expression empty in the way military officers become empty when they have decided mercy is inefficient. Around him gathered scientists, cadets, record keepers, and a few officials who pretended they had come for research instead of curiosity. No one said it out loud, but we had all come to witness an ending. Valethar had outlived empires. He had crossed war zones, radiation fields, and the kind of deep space storms that made navigation systems start praying in error codes. Now he was old, exhausted, and inconvenient. The official term was final transition support. The practical meaning was simple. Keep him calm, document the last signs, and make sure nothing unpredictable happened before the chamber was cleared. Then the human boy entered with the exchange delegation. Mason Reed. I remember his name because it looked painfully ordinary on the roster. Human male, Earth origin, 17 years old, civilian educational placement, no command clearance, no medical authority, no reason whatsoever to change the course of that room. He wore the same plain visitor jacket as the others, gray fabric, soft shoes, hands tucked loosely at his sides. He looked too young to stand near history and too small to argue with it. Commander Sareth noticed him immediately and frowned, as if someone had brought a house cat into a court hearing. Keep the Earth student behind the yellow line, he said. This is not a school display. Mason did not answer. His eyes were fixed on Valethar. That bothered me. Most species looked at the dragon and saw size first. Teeth, wings, claws, mass, danger, all the obvious things biology shouted at the mind. Mason looked at the breathing. He looked at the spaces between breaths. He looked at the way the old dragon's left forelimb twitched whenever the machines hummed too loudly. Then the chamber lights dimmed to amber. The final breath protocol began its countdown, calm and official and completely wrong. 10, 9, 8. The doctors lowered their heads. The cadets stopped whispering. Commander Sareth looked satisfied. At 7, Mason stepped over the yellow line. At 6, 2 guards turned toward him. At 5, he reached the safety glass, placed one hand against it, and whispered one word. No, the countdown paused because Valethar opened one golden eye. The countdown froze at 5, and for one ridiculous second the entire recovery chamber behaved like a classroom after someone had given the wrong answer out loud. No one moved. The amber lights stayed dim. The medical monitors held their last tones in a nervous electronic stutter. Valethar's single open eye reflected the safety glass, the ceiling rails, the scientists, the soldiers, and the small human boy standing where no visitor had permission to stand. Commander Sareth Kor was the first to remember his rank. Remove him, he said. Not loudly. He did not need volume. Officers like Sareth carried command the way some species carried venom. Quietly, and with great confidence that everyone else would react correctly. 2 station guards started forward, but even they slowed when Valethar's eye shifted. Not toward them, toward Mason Reed. That tiny movement changed the temperature of the room. I know that sounds poetic. It was not. The climate regulators actually reacted because the dragon's internal heat signature jumped 3 degrees in half a second. Every monitor above the containment cradle blinked from amber to blue, then to white, then to a color I had never seen outside emergency simulations. The senior physician beside me whispered, "That is not possible." On Station Halberd 9, those words usually meant paperwork was about to become very complicated. Commander Sareth turned toward the medical console. "Explain." Dr. Velra, head of Xenological Decline Care, looked as though she had just been asked to explain gravity changing its mind. Her lower hands flew across the display. Neurological response increased. Respiratory rhythm stabilized. Heart activity is irregular but stronger. Because of the human? Sareth asked, making the word human sound like a stain on a clean floor. There is no causal pathway, Velra said. Then find one. That was the kind of officer Sareth was. Reality did not disobey him. It merely failed to report properly. Around the chamber, the gathered observers leaned closer despite every posted warning. They had come for the last breath protocol because Vaelthar was not just a patient. He was a legend with a medical chart. Before his capture, before the treaties, before age reduced him to a guarded exhibit, entire patrol routes had been planned around where he might sleep. Old fleet captains still lowered their voices when they spoke of his shadow crossing their viewports. Merchant crews painted protective marks on their hulls after surviving the same star lane as him. Children on 6 worlds were told to finish their meals before the black-winged fire of the void heard them complaining. And now all those stories had been compressed into one tired body inside a sterile room, surrounded by professionals waiting to measure the end of him. That was what we told ourselves. We were not cruel. We were scientific. We were orderly. We were respectful. We were also curious in that ugly way civilized beings become curious when something powerful can no longer stand over them. Mason kept his palm on the glass. He heard the machines, he said. Commander Sareth looked at him slowly. You will not speak as if you understand this creature. Mason did not look away from Vaelthar. Creature is the problem. A few cadets made soft, shocked sounds behind me. To challenge a commander was bold. To correct him while standing inside a restricted medical perimeter was something closer to career suicide, assuming one had a career. Sareth stepped closer until the yellow warning line glowed between his boots and Mason's shoes. The difference between them was almost comical. Sareth was tall, armored under his uniform, skin the color of storm-polished stone, eyes narrow and cold. Mason was 5 feet 10 at most, pale from the station lights, wearing a visitor badge that still said temporary access. The galaxy should have known how this conversation ended. It did not. Earthchild, Sareth said, step back. Mason finally turned his head. His voice stayed quiet. No, sir. Behind the glass, Vaelthar exhaled, and the chamber doors sealed themselves. The chamber doors sealing should have triggered panic. Instead, it triggered bureaucracy. 3 different consoles began asking for confirmation codes. 2 cadets started whispering evacuation procedure numbers, and Dr. Velra looked personally offended that the room had chosen a dramatic moment to become legally complicated. Commander Sareth Kaur did not move away from Mason Reed. That was the impressive thing about him, I suppose. A lesser officer might have stepped back when a legendary dragon changed the locks. Sareth only adjusted one cuff of his silver uniform and stared at the human boy as if the problem could still be solved by disappointment. You have interrupted a sanctioned medical procedure, he said. You have violated a restricted line, interfered with military observation, and spoken without authorization in a secured xenological chamber. Mason glanced toward the sealed doors. Then back at Vaelthar. That sounds like a lot. Sareth's eyes narrowed. It is. Then I should probably make it worth it. Nobody laughed. I wanted to. Not because it was funny, exactly, but because the sentence was so absurdly human. Cornered, outmatched, surrounded by officers, trapped in a room with an ancient predator, and still somehow speaking like a kid who had decided to take responsibility for a broken window. The human exchange supervisor, a tired woman from Earth named Mrs. Calloway, raised both hands from behind the observer rail. Commander, he is a student. Let me speak with him. Your student is no longer your concern. Sareth did not even turn toward her. He has placed himself inside an active security event. Mason looked back at her then, just once. She did not tell him to stop. That bothered Sareth more than open defiance would have. Earth adults, I would later learn, had a strange habit of recognizing when their young were about to do something reckless for the correct reason. They did not always approve. but sometimes they simply tighten their jaw and let history happen. Sareth stepped closer to the yellow line until the warning glow touched the edge of his boots. Human, listen carefully. You are here because the Council believes exposure to advanced civilizations may improve your species. You are not a physician. You are not a commander. You are not trained in ancient predator biology. You are a visitor from a world that still argues about weather forecasts. Several officers made quiet sounds of approval. The insult was lazy, but rank made lazy things sound official. Mason took it without blinking. That was the pattern with him. Every time someone tried to make him smaller, he became stiller. Not bigger, not louder. Stiller, like pressure settling before a storm. Where I come from, Mason said, you do not need a title to know when something is suffering. Dr. Velra's fingers paused above her console. Sareth's jaw tightened. You presume emotion is evidence. No, sir, Mason said. I presume ignoring it is dangerous. Velthar's eye shifted again, following the sound of Mason's voice. The monitors responded immediately. Heart, rhythm up, breath interval shorter, thermal output rising. Across the chamber, the dragon's tail moved an inch, and every armed guard suddenly remembered the exact location of every exit they could not use. Sareth noticed their hesitation. Pride flickered across his face, cold and sharp. Enough. Since the Earth student believes compassion outranks command, we will demonstrate why command exists. He turned toward the security team. Escort him away from the glass. Minimal force. No unnecessary damage to the equipment. The nearest guard approached Mason with professional confidence. He was nearly 7 feet tall, plated at the shoulders, with hands broad enough to cover the boy's entire upper arm. He reached out slowly, almost kindly, the way one might handle a confused child near a busy street. Mason did not step back. He only said, "Please do not grab me." The guard ignored him. That was the first real mistake anyone made after the doors sealed. Not because Mason looked dangerous. He did not. That was exactly why it worked. The guard saw a soft human boy. Velthar saw something else. And for the first time since the countdown began, the ancient dragon lifted his head from the cradle. The guard's hand stopped 1 inch from Mason Reed's shoulder because Velthar moved, and when an ancient dragon moves after everyone has agreed, he is too weak to matter. Every smart creature in the room suddenly discovers religion. The movement was not large. He did not rise fully. He did not break the cradle. He simply lifted his head, slow and heavy, until one golden eye had a clear line to the guard's wrist. That was enough. The guard froze so completely his armor joints clicked from the strain of holding position. Commander Sareth Kor saw the hesitation and mistook it for disobedience. "Continue," he ordered. The guard swallowed. Mason, still facing the glass, spoke without raising his voice. "I said please." The guard tried to recover his dignity. He reached again, faster this time, not with cruelty, not even with anger, but with the stubborn confidence of someone who believed size made the decision for him. Mason turned his body half a step. That was all. 1/2 step. The guard's hand passed the space where Mason had been, and Mason's palm settled lightly against the outside of the guard's wrist. Then the human boy rotated his own shoulder, shifted his weight, and the 7-foot officer lost his balance like the floor had quietly changed sides. There was no crash, no injury, no wild struggle. The guard simply folded down to one knee, staring at his own arm with the stunned expression of a person whose body had accepted instructions from a stranger. Mason let go immediately. "I asked nicely," he said. The room made a sound I had never heard from professionals before. It was not a gasp. It was not a shout. It was the soft, collective noise of certainty leaving a species. Commander Sareth's face hardened. "Restrain him." 2 more guards moved at once, and this time they came from opposite sides. Good training, proper spacing, controlled advance. Exactly the kind of formation that academy manuals praised and real fear complicated. Mason backed toward the glass, not running, not panicking, just making them come to him. Velthar's breathing deepened behind the barrier. The medical monitors began climbing again. Dr. Velra whispered, "His cardiac output is stabilizing." Sareth snapped, then increased sedation. Nobody moved to obey. That was important. Orders are easy when the universe agrees with them. Orders become heavier when an ancient predator starts waking up because a human child refuses to step aside. The first guard reached for Mason's jacket. Mason dipped under the arm, touched the guard's elbow, and guided him into the second guard's path. They bumped shoulders, harmless but awkward, and the clean formation became a hallway traffic problem. A few cadets actually leaned forward, not because they wanted violence, because they were watching a human rewrite physical confidence in real time. Mason did not hit harder. He did not move faster than sight. He simply kept standing where their strength arrived too late. Commander Saratha's voice dropped to ice. "You have been trained." Mason glanced at him. "My uncle taught youth wrestling in Wyoming." The translator rendered Wyoming as unknown territorial designation, which somehow made the answer more alarming. Velthar's head rose higher. One massive claw shifted against the cradle restraints, and every alarm in the chamber turned from warning amber to urgent white. The dragon was not responding to the machines. He was responding to Mason. And for the first time, I understood the truth Commander Sarath refused to see. The human was not interrupting the protocol. The human was becoming the only reason the room still had one. Commander Sarath Kaur did what commanders always do when reality refuses to salute. He blamed the nearest subordinate. "Restore the countdown," he ordered. Dr. Velra stared at him as if he had asked her to restart a hurricane. "Commander, the life support system is no longer following external sequence. Velthar's neural activity is increasing on its own." "Then override it." "That is the override." The words landed softly, but they shook the chamber harder than any alarm. The final breath protocol had not merely paused. It had lost authority. Every screen around the containment cradle showed the same impossible trend: stronger pulse, deeper respiration, rising heat, coordinated muscle response. The ancient dragon was not fading anymore. He was waking up. Mason Reed saw it before the rest of us understood it. He turned from the confused guards and placed both hands against the safety glass, not with panic, but with that quiet human urgency that made every movement feel chosen. "Can he hear me through this?" he asked. Dr. Velra hesitated. "The glass blocks most vibration." Mason looked at the dragon's open eye. "Not all of it." Commander Sarath crossed the floor in 3 long steps. Anger held so tightly, it almost looked like discipline. "You will step away now." Mason did not. That was the part one keep returning to when I try to explain humans to new cadets. He was not stronger than everyone in the room. He was not ranked higher. He did not have a weapon, a badge, or permission. He simply reached the point where obedience would make him part of something wrong, and he stopped cooperating. Sarath drew a slim control blade from his belt, not a battlefield weapon, but a command tool used to direct security drones and open-sealed systems. It glowed pale blue along the edge as he lifted it toward the medical console. "If the patient responds to disruption, we remove the disruption. Guards, remove the human from the chamber perimeter." The 2 guards regained their footing and came again, slower this time, more careful. Mason finally stepped away from the glass, but not backward. He moved sideways, placing himself between them and the console rail. One guard reached high. The other reached low. Smart. Coordinated. Mason waited until both committed, then dropped his weight, caught the high guard's sleeve, and turned through the gap between them like he was slipping through a closing door. Their own movement carried them past him. One stumbled into the rail and caught himself. The other spun half around, confused but unharmed, staring at Mason as if Earth gravity had reached up through the floor and taken sides. Mason did not smile. "Please stop making me do that," he said. Saratha's control finally cracked. "You arrogant little primitive." He activated the command blade and jabbed it toward the console. The protocol lights flared red. Velthar's breathing hitched. Not from weakness, from pain. The sound that came from his chest was low enough to vibrate through my teeth. Mason's face changed then. Not rage. Something colder. Something older. He moved before Sarath could press the second command. The human crossed 12 feet faster than anyone expected, caught Saratha's wrist with both hands, and twisted just enough to point the blade away from the console. Sarath tried to pull free. Mason stepped closer instead, using his whole body like a lever, and the commander's balance vanished. The blade clattered harmlessly across the floor. Sarath dropped to one knee, not injured, not broken, just publicly corrected by a boy who had been told to stay behind a line. Mason let him go immediately and picked up the command blade, holding it by the dull handle. "No more protocol," he said. Behind the glass, Velthar exhaled once, long and deep, and the safety barrier cracked from corner to corner like the room itself had decided to listen. The crack in the safety barrier did not spread like broken glass. It spread like a decision. A thin white line ran from the upper corner of the containment wall down toward Mason Reed's handprint, then split into 3 smaller lines, each one glowing faintly from the heat building on the other side. Every alarm in the chamber changed tone. Not louder, lower, more serious. The kind of sound systems make when they stop asking for attention and begin filing final warnings. Dr. Velro whispered. He is transferring thermal pressure into the barrier. Commander Sareth Kaur rose from one knee, dignity damaged far more than his body, and pointed at Mason with a shaking hand. Security drones online. Full perimeter control. 4 silver spheres dropped from ceiling ports and unfolded into hovering restraint units, each one projecting soft blue capture fields designed to freeze movement without injury. In a normal security event, that would have ended everything. Against a confused technician, a panicked visitor, even a trained soldier, drone geometry was almost unfair. The units came from 4 angles at once, blocking retreat, sealing the space around the target, reducing choice to mathematics. Mason looked up at them, then at the cracked barrier, then at Vaelthar's open eye behind it. I do not have time for this, he said. That was not bravado. That was the terrifying part. He sounded mildly frustrated, like a farm kid discovering the gate latch had jammed while rain clouds were rolling in. The first drone fired a restraint field toward his legs. Mason stepped onto the low edge of the console rail, used it like a stair, and moved over the field before it locked. The second adjusted instantly. Mason dropped back to the floor, slid under its projection, and gave the drone a light push with the flat of his hand. Not hard, just enough to change its angle. The field clipped the third drone instead, and both units froze each other in a bright blue cage above the floor. A cadet near me made a small sound that translated as impossible, which was becoming the unofficial theme of the day. The fourth drone swept behind Mason, trying to pin his arms. He turned with it, let the field close around empty air, and tapped the emergency service panel on its underside with the handle of Sareth's command blade. The drone chirped politely and shut itself down for maintenance review. Mason set the blade on the floor and slid it away with his foot. No weapons, he said, mostly to himself. Bad habit. Sareth stared at the disabled drones as if they had betrayed military tradition. What are you? Mason looked back at him. Busy. Behind the barrier, Vaelthar moved again. This time the whole cradle groaned as the ancient dragon drew one forelimb beneath himself. The restraints did not snap or shatter. They unlocked, one after another, because the life support system had finally recognized that its patient was no longer declining. He was recovering. Dr. Velra stepped toward the console, eyes wide with the kind of fear that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with discovery. His organs are synchronizing. Heat distribution is normalizing. Neural activity is coordinated. She looked at Mason as if he had become a medical event. What did you do? Mason pressed his palm against the cracked barrier again, gentler this time. I reminded him he was not alone. Sareth made a sharp sound of contempt. Sentiment does not repair ancient biology. Vaelthar answered before Mason could. Not with fire. Not with a roar. With a breath. One controlled exhale rolled across the inside of the barrier, fogging the cracked surface from edge to edge. In that fog, the final protocol countdown vanished completely. The chamber went quiet except for the deep rhythm of the dragon breathing on purpose. Mason leaned close to the glass and spoke softly. That is it. Stay with me. And the oldest monster on station, Halberd 9, listened to the human boy like those words were a rope thrown across the dark. Vaelthar did not break free like a monster in an old warning tale. He stood up like a king, remembering that the throne had always been his. One restraint after another released with soft mechanical clicks, each sound more impossible than the last, until the cradle that had held him for years became nothing but expensive furniture around his feet. The chamber did not explode into chaos. It tightened. Scientists backed away from their consoles. Cadets pressed themselves against the observation rail. Guards lifted their hands but did not know what to aim at, because the ancient dragon was not advancing, not threatening, not doing any of the things our emergency training had prepared us to survive. He lowered his enormous head toward Mason Reed. Slowly, carefully. The cracked barrier slid open in sections as the automatic system recognized a safe medical transition, which was the most polite description I have ever heard for a legend deciding to leave his bed. Heat rolled out first, warm as a desert road at noon, carrying the scent of old metal, storm air, and something deeper that made every instinct in my body suggest becoming much smaller. Mason did not move back. That fact became the center of the room. Valthar's head came within 3 feet of him, one golden eye larger than the human boy's whole hand, and Mason simply lifted his palm. Not high, not dramatic, just enough to offer a choice. Commander Sareth Kor found his voice at the worst possible time. Everyone away from the creature. Containment recovery formation. No one obeyed quickly. That delay wounded him more than open refusal. Now he snapped. The guard shifted. Valthar noticed. His wing unfolded a few feet, not fully, just enough to place a wall of dark scale and golden edge between Mason and the room. It was not an attack. It was a statement. A very old, very large statement. The nearest guard stopped so fast his boots squeaked against the floor. Mason looked up at the dragon and whispered, "Easy. They are scared." Valthar's eye moved from the guard's back to Mason. The wing stayed exactly where it was. Dr. Velra stepped forward with both hands open, her medical training fighting a losing battle against common sense. "Mason, if you can understand his response, tell him we are not trying to harm him." Mason glanced at the disabled protocol console, the frozen drones, the guards, and Sareth's rigid posture. That might be a hard sell. The sentence should not have been funny. Somehow, one of the cadets made a tiny choking noise anyway. Sareth turned toward the sound, humiliated by oxygen itself. This is not a negotiation with a child and an animal. Mason's expression sharpened. Then stop acting like the animal is the only one that needs training. The room went so still the monitors seemed loud. Valthar lowered his head another inch, and Mason rested his palm against the ridge above the dragon's eye. The contact lasted 1 second. 2. 3. Every medical screen flashed new data so fast the displays blurred. Thermal balance stable. Cardiac pattern improving. Stress chemistry decreasing. Neural coherence rising. Dr. Velra covered her mouth with one hand. "He is calming him." I thought of every lecture I had ever heard about dominance, classification, containment, and control. I thought of all the official language we use to make fear sound professional. Then I looked at the human boy standing in the shadow of something my people had feared for generations, and I understood that we had studied the wrong miracle. Valthar was not choosing freedom first. He was choosing Mason. The dragon folded his wing closer, shielding the boy from the commander, the guards, the doctors, and all of our polished certainty. Mason looked back at us over his shoulder, pale face lit by warning lights and dragon heat, and said the most dangerous calm words I had ever heard. "Nobody touches him unless he says yes." Commander Sareth Kor looked at Mason Reed, then at Valthar's lowered wing, and made the fatal mistake of believing protection was weakness wearing a prettier uniform. His hand moved slowly toward the emergency rack beside the medical console, where the station kept non-lethal authority tools for situations too dangerous for discussion and too embarrassing for retreat. Dr. Velra saw it first. "Commander, do not escalate." Sareth ignored her. Of course he did. Men like him heard caution as disrespect and compassion as contamination. He pulled a long energy spear from the rack, its blue edge humming to life with a clean, official sound. Everything about that weapon said procedure. Everything about Mason's face said no. The guards shifted backward, not forward, which should have told Sareth that command had already left him. Valthar's golden eye narrowed, and the heat in the room rose another few degrees, enough to make the observation glass fog at the corners. Mason kept one hand on the dragon's brow ridge. "Put it down," he said. Sareth almost smiled. "You are a child from a primitive world, standing beside a recovering weapon you do not understand." Mason's voice stayed quiet. "He is not a weapon. Everything powerful is a weapon in the hands of someone honest enough to admit it." Sareth stepped in, spear angled low, not aimed at Valthar, but at Mason, because he had finally understood the hinge point of the room. Remove the human, regain the dragon. Simple. Logical. Wrong. Valthar's wings started to move, but Mason tapped the scale beneath his palm. "Stay." The dragon stopped. That was the second time every alien in the chamber forgot how to breathe. Mason stepped out from behind the wing alone. No armor, no blade, no shield. Just a 17-year-old human boy who looked suddenly less like a student and more like the answer to a question nobody had been brave enough to ask Earth. Sereth attacked with a textbook control thrust, fast and precise, meant to force Mason away from the dragon and toward the guards. Mason did not go where the lesson expected. He slipped inside the spear's line, close enough that the glowing edge became useless, caught the shaft with both hands, and turned his hips the way Earth fighters turned farm gates, baseball bats, and stubborn things that refused to move politely. Sereth's strength surged forward. Mason borrowed it. One step, one pivot, one sharp pull, and the commander's balance vanished under him. He landed on the padded floor with the spear pinned safely against the ground, his pride making far more noise than his body. Mason stood over him, breathing evenly. "That was your force," he said. "I just gave it somewhere to go." No one spoke. Even the alarms seemed to lower their volume out of respect. Sereth tried to rise, but Valethar moved then, placing one enormous claw between the commander and the spear. Not touching him, not threatening in the messy way stories describe monsters. Just closing the argument. The ancient dragon leaned forward until his shadow covered Sereth's uniform, and the commander finally understood what the rest of us had already learned. The dragon had not been tamed. He had chosen sides. Mason picked up the spear, deactivated it, and handed it to Dr. Velra without taking his eyes off Sereth. Nobody else points anything at him. Dr. Velra accepted the weapon with trembling hands. Understood. The word came out like a medical order, a surrender, and a prayer all at once. Valethar lowered his head behind Mason, not bowing, not begging, simply standing with him. The commander stayed on the floor, silent at last, while the smallest person in the chamber became the only authority the oldest creature in the room trusted. The official report used 600 pages to avoid saying the simple thing. It called the event an unauthorized cross-species intervention, a containment irregularity, a command structure failure, and, my personal favorite, an emotionally mediated recovery anomaly. None of those phrases survived contact with the people who had actually been in the chamber. We knew what happened. Mason Reed refused to let a legend die alone, and the legend decided that refusal was worth standing for. After Commander Sereth Kor was escorted from the floor, not by force, not with drama, but with the quiet efficiency of officers who had suddenly discovered new priorities, Dr. Velra took control of the room. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as the data kept improving. Valethar's heart rhythm strengthened. His breathing settled into a deep, even pattern. His thermal core stabilized at levels the archive said were impossible for his age. Every few seconds, the dragon looked down at Mason, and every time he did, the monitors became less frantic, as if the machines were learning from the human too. Mason stayed beside him, one hand resting against a warm black scale, speaking in low tones none of our translators handled well because he was not giving commands. He was telling ordinary Earth stories. Something about winter roads in Montana. Something about his grandfather fixing fences before sunrise. Something about an old rescue dog that would not eat unless someone sat beside him. Completely useless information, medically speaking. Except Valethar listened. That was the part the report never captured. The dragon did not respond to rank, sedation, protocol, fear, or containment. He responded to presence. He responded to someone staying. Mrs. Calloway, the human supervisor, finally stepped over the observation line and placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. No one stopped her. Not one guard. Not one doctor. Not even the station security system, which had apparently decided Earth visitors were above its pay grade. She asked him softly if he was all right. Mason looked exhausted for the first time all day. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Then he looked at Valethar. I think he just needed someone to tell him he was not done yet. Dr. Velra heard that and had to turn away from the console. We all pretended not to notice. Later, when the chamber doors reopened, nobody rushed in. The crowd outside had seen the warning lights, heard the alarms, and prepared for disaster. Instead, they saw a human boy walking slowly beside an ancient dragon, guiding him not with chains or command signals, but with one hand and a quiet voice. Valethar's wings remained folded. His head stayed low enough to fit through the corridor arch. He passed Commander Sereth without looking at him. That might have been the cruelest mercy of the day. The commander had wanted control. The dragon gave him irrelevance. By the next cycle, every academy, fleet channel, and diplomatic office had a copy of the recording. Some argued Mason was reckless. Some argued Vaelthar's recovery was coincidence. Some argued humans were emotionally unstable and should never be allowed near ancient apex species without supervision. They missed the point, as usual. The monster was never the dragon. The monster was the belief that power loses value when it becomes tired, old, inconvenient, or afraid. Earth had apparently rejected that belief long before it reached the stars. Humans were not terrifying because they could fight. Many species could fight. Humans were terrifying because sometimes they looked at something the galaxy had labeled finished, stepped across every warning line, and said no with enough conviction to make death pause and listen.